Hi everyone! In this video I wanted to review for you the new Eye Putty Primer from e.l.f. Cosmetics. It comes in a pot like this. They just recently released this as a primer but also kind of as a base for eyeshadow. But I didn't want to just test out the product itself. I really wanted to see how it fared against something that looks very similar, which is something you're probably very familiar with, MAC's paint pots. So this video is going to be a review not only for e.l.f.'s new Eye Putty Primer, but also to compare it and test it against a MAC paint pot to see if it truly could be a dupe or how much it is similar or how much it is different. So if that interests you, then make sure you keep watching. Subscribe to the channel by hitting that red subscribe button. Follow Allura Beauty on Instagram. And of course, if you missed the latest video, then I will go ahead and link that in the upper right-hand corner for you to see. On my lips today, I am wearing one of Milani's Ludicrous Matte Lip Crayons. I did a lip swatch and review video for the colors in the line for this new lip product. So if you want to check that out, I will also link it for you. The specific shade that I am wearing on my lips is 120 Can't Even. All right, so first I want to give you an up-close look at the new e.l.f. Putty Primer, and I'm going to tell you what the cost is, how much you get, and then I'm going to swatch them against the paint pot that I chose. Both of these products come in a wide variety, well, maybe not a wide variety. The e.l.f. one comes in 5 different shades, I believe, 5 or 6, and the paint pots there's dozens of shades over the years, and some of them permanent. The ones that you'll see throughout the clips are going to be Soft Ochre in the MAC paint pot and the shade Cream in the new e.l.f. Putty Primer. So let's jump to a close-up look of the new e.l.f. Putty Primer and how it swatches and compares up close to the matte paint pot. So this is currently available through e.l.f.'s website. It is also available through Ulta. If you go on Target's website, they have misnamed one of the primers as the eye primer. It's actually one of the face primers, I believe. So just beware. I don't believe they are currently selling the eye primer through their website yet. At all places, it retails for $5. And even though we're only looking at the one shade in this video, it is available in a total of 6 different shades. There is white, cream, rose, sand, clay, and black. As for the description, e.l.f. says, our best-selling putty primer is now formulated to extend your eyeshadow wear for up to 12 hours. Amp up your eyeshadow with this color intensifying putty primer that locks in eyeshadow for a crease-proof look. Infused with vegan squalane to help moisturize the eyelid while extending wear. So there's a couple of things that I really like about this description. Hopefully the claims hold up. One of them, of course, is that it extends the life and color of your eyeshadow, but also that there is squalane that has been added. The squalane seems to appear in about the middle of the ingredients list, so not an insignificant amount, which is nice. And I don't see any other irritating, fragrant, or drying alcohol ingredients in the ingredients list. So here's what the pot looks like. It is frosted, but it is plastic. It's not glass. And you have a plastic lid. The name of your shade is going to be on this random kind of sticker on the side of the pot. And the lid unscrews and you get the product inside. No sort of stopper or anything like that. Now, in comparison, here's one of my many paint pots. The MAC ones come with an actual glass pot with a plastic lid. We are going to compare the e.l.f. one to the shade Soft Ochre because it's the closest one. And just like with the e.l.f. one, you have a screw off top. This particular shade I have mixed up to revive it because it had kind of not dried up, but paint pots tend to kind of settle and then shrink into themselves. They work perfectly fine. You just have to mix them up to reincorporate the oils and you'll get the same effect and formula. So here is the MAC one on the left and the e.l.f. one on the right, so you can kind of see visually how they're compared. Obviously, if this had been a new MAC paint pot, it would be smooth and flat like the e.l.f. one is, but you can see the colors are pretty similar. Now, the paint pots are $22, so between 4 and 5 times as much money as the e.l.f. one. With the e.l.f. primer, you get 0.19 ounces or 5.3 grams. And with the paint pot, you get 0.17 ounces or 5 grams. So absolutely the price or the amount per dollar is infinitely better with the e.l.f. one. You get more product for a fraction of the price. So I'm gonna actually swatch these for you side by side so you can see what they look like. See how similar they are in color and finish. So the first swatch is for the MAC paint pot in soft ochre. Next I'll swatch, oh interesting, this is much stiffer, a lot less creamy initially to the touch. And I'll swatch that one right next to the MAC one. So the e.l.f. one is deeper and it actually has, it's hard to describe, it has a thinner texture to it. What's interesting is the way that the MAC one sets is a little more sticky. Even though it's initially creamier in the pot, it feels a little more, there's a little more drag on the surface once it dries. I guess similar with the e.l.f. one too, but it doesn't seem as sticky. All right, here are those two side by side. On the left is the MAC paint pot, on the right is the e.l.f. primer. And I want to see how much these intensify eyeshadows on top and compare the effect on the eyeshadow side by side. So I'm just gonna take a random shade from, this is one of Makeup's Forever's palettes. This was the Let's Gold palette. Just take this shade here, Molten. So first I'm gonna swatch it by itself over bare skin, no primer or anything underneath. I do have, you know, whatever regular lotion I have on my skin. I'm gonna go ahead and get more product. First swatching it over MAC's paint pot. I don't see a huge difference there. Next we'll apply it over the e.l.f. Putty Primer. I will say that they seemed to go on a little bit more smoothly over the primers, and the most smooth was over the e.l.f. primer of the three. So here are the three swatches side by side. The first one, you can see it's a little bit patchy there in some places. The one over the MAC paint pot is smoother, but I wouldn't really say it's necessarily more intense. And then I would say that there is an increase in intensity, and it's definitely smooth over the e.l.f. primer. And now let's jump to wear testing and applying these on the lids. I tested both of these throughout the day. The way I started is by applying MAC's Soft Ochre to my left eye, and I applied the e.l.f. Putty Primer to my right eye. Now, I didn't put anything else on the skin other than my normal skincare, so there's no other base on the lids. It's just these two products before I applied eyeshadow. Consistent with the swatches, the MAC paint pot is much creamier. It glides a lot more easily across the lids and across the skin. The e.l.f. Putty Eye Primer is a lot more stiff and dry in the pot. If you do take the time to let your finger warm up the product for a little bit, it becomes a little more pliable, but it's still not going to glide as easily as the MAC paint pot across the lids. Once these are on the lids, there isn't too much of a noticeable difference in terms of the color and the tone. I do think though that the matte paint pot gives a little bit more opaque coverage in terms of the color. And if the formula is consistent across the e.l.f. Eye Putty primers, then this is something that you may notice a little bit more if you were comparing, say, a deeper, darker color of a matte paint pot to a deeper and darker color in the e.l.f. Putty primer line. But since the particular shades that I'm testing in this video are pretty much lighter nude shades, you don't see a difference in the opacity as much. I noticed that when I applied the powder eyeshadow over both of these products, there is a good bit of drag and tug on the skin. Now, in my normal everyday makeup routine, after I apply a primer, I always put a base of translucent or whatever color eyeshadow shade that's close to my own skin tone. I put that all over the mobile lid and orbital bone area as a kind of powder base to help additional eyeshadows that I am applying to the skin buff and blend a lot more easily. So that's something you may want to do, because otherwise the bases, both the MAC Paint Primer and the e.l.f. Putty Primer, they cause the eyeshadow that you put on top to stick and kind of drag instead of glide and blend smoothly. Nevertheless, I was able to get a what I think is decently blended out eyeshadow look. And again, I don't think that I noticed a huge visible difference between the vibrancy or pigmentation of the shadows with the left side versus the right side. So then I finished my eye look and I kind of went about my day. After about 4 hours, I checked in and the sides were pretty similar, but I do feel like I could see the beginnings of the e.l.f. Putty Primer side ever so slightly fading right in the fold of the crease area. So fading in terms of the color slash perhaps the start of some creasing and some of the eyeshadow moving away from the crease area of my lid. And then I checked in again at the 8/9 hour mark. And I do feel like you could, if you looked up close, you could see that kind of baldness or creasing in the specific fold of the crease on the e.l.f. Putty Primer side. Now, when I compared to the MAC side, I also started to see sort of the beginnings of that similar type of creasing, but the e.l.f. side had progressed more, and the MAC side kind of looked the way that the e.l.f. side had looked 4 hours earlier. I also feel like the depth or vibrancy of my eyeshadow had faded slightly more on the e.l.f. side as compared to the MAC side. And once again, I feel like if I had used a super deep shade, like if I were doing a black smoky eye or a really, really vibrant, brightly colored eyeshadow, you might see this creasing be a little bit more noticeable. But frankly, overall, the difference between the MAC side and the e.l.f. side is pretty subtle. So at the end of the day, my opinion is, could you call this a dupe? I think so, pretty much. I mean, there is such a difference in terms of the price point and the amount of product that you get. The e.l.f. one is just so much more affordable per ounce or unit of product that you're getting. And the differences in the longevity, the crease resistance, the additional vibrancy it gives to the eyeshadows, the differences between the two are pretty small. So I don't think that if you're looking at purely at price, that it would be worth it to pay 4.5 times more for the paint pot when you could get a very similar effect and lifespan out of the e.l.f. Putty Primer. So if you can find a shade that you want that's close or equivalent in the e.l.f. line to whatever paint pot you may be considering, then I definitely think you can be confident that the e.l.f. Putty Primer will give you a very similar effect. And putting all comparisons to the MAC paint pots aside, just purely evaluating e.l.f.'s Eye Putty Primer on its own, I think this is a good product. At $5, it's definitely something that will last you a very long time. It does provide a solid base for your eyeshadows. I personally would still put that translucent or base layer of powder on before you start your eye look because of the resistance and skipping that it will cause if you don't do that. But if you're looking for this kind of slightly drier cream type of base for your lids, this is the perfect, very affordable product. Personally, at the end of the day, I would still prefer my very original, traditional, used to be $1 eyeshadow primer from e.l.f. I think now they've probably increased the price to $2 or $3. And the reason I prefer that is because I'm not looking for any color out of my eyeshadow primer or base. And that one has a consistency, a cream consistency that's easily moved across the lids. It doesn't create any tackiness or resistance on top of it once it dries down. And that's just what I prefer. But again, if that more putty texture is what you're looking for, and if you want some sort of color correction or pigment out of your primer, then the putty primers are going to be a better fit for you. And they give you a lot more product for the price. All right, so those are my thoughts on e.l.f.'s new eye putty primer and whether it could be a dupe for a much more expensive paint pot. Please let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. I hope this video was helpful to you and that you enjoyed. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch, and I'll see you in the next video.